There was a time when a simple message could cost more than it was worth. Okay, time when staying in touch across borders meant watching the clock, counting characters, and choosing words carefully, not because they mattered, but because they were expensive. Time when communication was controlled by gatekeepers, bundled into plans, hidden behind fees, and rationed like a scarce resource. For billions of people, especially those far from home, silence wasn't a choice. It was a constraint, and the world accepted it. This is where our story begins, not with a breakthrough, not with a billion-dollar deal, but with a problem so common that no one questioned it anymore. Messages cost money, calls were limited, and if you lived outside the system, you paid the highest price. No one was trying to fix that. No one except a quiet immigrant who had grown up knowing exactly what it felt like to be disconnected. Jan Koum's story doesn't begin in Silicon Valley. It begins in a small village in Ukraine, where life was defined by shortages. Not just of money, but of freedom, opportunity, and voice. Jan grew up in a world where phones were tapped and conversations were careful, where speaking freely wasn't a given, where communication itself could be dangerous. His family lived modestly. His father worked construction. His mother stayed home. And when Jan was still a teenager, his father passed away. Soon after, his mother made a decision that would change everything. They would leave. They arrived in the United States with almost nothing. No money, no English, no roadmap. Jan and his mother settled in a small apartment in California. His mother worked as a babysitter. Jan cleaned floors at a grocery store. At night, instead of dreaming big, Jan taught himself. He read manuals. He learned how computers worked by taking them apart and putting them back together. Not because it was trendy, but because knowledge was free, and he had learned early that freedom mattered. There's an anecdote Jan once shared that captures this moment perfectly. When his family first arrived, they relied on food stamps. One day, standing in line, Jan noticed something. Everyone around him was staring at the floor. No one made eye contact. It was quiet, heavy. Years later, he would say that moment taught him something important. Systems don't just fail economically. They fail emotionally. They make people feel small. That idea stayed with him. Jan didn't follow a traditional path. He didn't finish college. Instead, he learned fast, worked hard, and eventually landed a job at Yahoo. It was the late days of the dot-com boom, and Yahoo was at the center of the internet universe. At Yahoo, Jan met Brian Acton. They became friends. They worked on infrastructure behind the scenes, unglamorous work that most people never noticed. And for years, they watched as the internet grew louder, flashier, more crowded. They also watched something else. They watched communication get more complicated. Email was overloaded. SMS was expensive. Messaging was fragmented, locked inside platforms and telecom deals. Every new service tried to add more features, more ads, more noise. But the core problem remained untouched. Talking to the people you cared about still felt harder than it should. In 2007, both Jan and Brian left Yahoo. They were tired, comfortable, but restless. They traveled, they thought. They applied to Facebook and got rejected. That rejection would later become one of the most famous footnotes in tech history. But at the time, it was just another closed door. What mattered more was what came next. Jan bought an iPhone, and for the first time, he noticed something subtle but powerful. The App Store wasn't just about games or tools. It was about presence. Apps could show status, available, busy, offline. Jan had an idea. What if your phone number became your identity? What if you could see who was reachable without calling? What if messaging wasn't about platforms but people? At first, WhatsApp wasn't even a messaging app. It was a status app, a way to let friends know what you were doing. At the gym, in a meeting, simple. But then Apple introduced push notifications, and everything changed. Suddenly, when someone updated their status, it could notify others instantly. Jan realized this could be something more, not just status, but communication, real-time, direct, personal. He and Brian began building quietly. No press, no hype, no grand vision statements. It's just a simple principle. No ads, no games, no gimmicks, and one radical idea. Messaging should be free. At the time, this idea sounded naive. Telecom companies made billions from SMS. Messaging apps were expected to monetize attention. Ads were the business model. Data was the currency. Jan rejected all of it. He believed ads were a tax on attention, that they distracted from what mattered, that communication, especially private communication, should not be interrupted or exploited. There's a story from early WhatsApp days that captures this mindset. When engineers suggested adding features to increase engagement, stickers, prompts, viral mechanics, Jan would push back. "Does this make the product better?" he'd ask. If the answer wasn't a clear yes, it didn't ship. WhatsApp charged $1 a year, not to make money, but to send a message. You are the customer, not the product. Investors were skeptical. Competitors laughed. Why would anyone pay when others were free? Why avoid ads when that's where the money was? But users didn't care about business models. They cared about reliability. WhatsApp worked when networks were weak. It worked on cheap phones. It used minimal data. It synced seamlessly with your contacts. No usernames, no friend requests, no friction. And something incredible happened. It spread quietly. Immigrants used it to talk to family back home. Students used it to organize. Communities used it to stay connected. In places where SMS was expensive or unreliable, WhatsApp became essential. In some countries, it wasn't just an app, it was infrastructure. And Jan watched it grow with a kind of cautious discipline. The servers struggled. Outages happened. Scaling was painful. But they refused to compromise the core idea. Private, simple, reliable communication. When WhatsApp hit hundreds of millions of users, it still had a tiny team. No marketing department, no sales team, just engineers and support. It broke every assumption about how tech companies were supposed to grow. Then came the moment the world noticed. Facebook came knocking. The offer was staggering. A number so large it didn't feel real, and for Jan it came with irony. The company that had once rejected him now wanted everything he had built. When the deal closed, Jan walked into Facebook's headquarters and saw something hanging on the wall. A piece of paper with his old food stamp card. He had kept it all those years, not as a trophy, as a reminder of where he came from, of why he built things the way he did, of the people who needed communication, not as entertainment, but as lifeline. WhatsApp went on to change how the world talks. It reshaped expectations. Messaging became free, global, instant. Telecom pricing models collapsed. Competitors were forced to adapt. More importantly, it changed culture. Families stayed closer. Movements organized faster. Our voices traveled farther. In moments of crisis, WhatsApp became a tool for survival. All because one founder refused to accept the way things were. Jan eventually left Facebook, staying true to his values about privacy and independence, true to the belief that technology should serve people, not extract from them. Jan Koum's story matters because it challenges a myth, that innovation must be loud, that success requires constant visibility, that monetization must come before meaning. His story reminds us that some of the most powerful ideas come from listening to frustration, remembering scarcity, and choosing simplicity over noise. WhatsApp didn't win by shouting louder. It won by being quiet, reliable, and human. And in a world more connected than ever, but often more distracted, it's a reminder worth holding on to. The next revolution may not look impressive at first. It may just solve a problem everyone else stopped noticing. And that's exactly how the world changes.